All right, a lot of questions after Sunday's game, so let's just jump into it. First question comes from Staples Clive, and if you want to be in the questions and answer video, make sure you stay tuned and locked in, subscribed and notified, so that when I post the Q&A prompt on the community tab, you can see it up and get your questions up. All right, first question from Staples Live says this. What do you make of Jenkins rotating with Teller? Is Teller done here? This could be one of a few things, right? Now, I know Wyatt Teller alluded to having an injury, but he also said that, before the game, they told him that they wanted to get a look at Tevin Jenkins. Also, keep in mind the terminology that they're using there tells you what part of the season they're in. Right? They said they wanted to get a look at Tevin Jenkins. Now, a lot of people are assuming just because Tevin came in for Wyatt, that this means that Wyatt, his spot is in trouble. I don't necessarily think that that's the case. I think there are other explanations that could explain it. I think it's possible that the Browns want to see what Tevin Jenkins looks like at guard, but the future plan is to have Tevin Jenkins play left guard when Joe Bitonio retires. So they wanted to get a look at Tevin, but not necessarily to replace Wyatt. But since this is Joe Bitonio's last ride, they don't want to just sit Joe Bitonio at any point of this season when Joe can play, because Joel is trying to get the most out of his final season that he can possibly get. So I think it's possible that they were getting a look to start Tevin Jenkins at guard, but it's probably not the position everybody thinks. Just financially speaking, it could make a lot of sense for the Browns to keep, Wyatt Teller on the roster for the time being for next year, just because you're not going to want to replace every single offensive lineman in 1 year. You're going to want to do it gradually over 2-3 years, right? But yeah, it was interesting. I do think that means they want to see if Tevin Jenkins has a future with this organization. I think, though, the future for Tevin Jenkins is probably going to be at left guard. But for obvious reasons, right? Joe Bitonio playing in his last year, you can't just bench Joe Bitonio or take Joel off the field out of respect to Joel in his final season and to get a good look at Tevin. So the guy you can take off the field is Wyatt, who maybe is dealing with something also like an injury, a calf injury, right? Like I think is what they said. So I don't know if the correlation is to Teller, but I do think Jenkins has a future on this offensive line. And I thought they ran pretty well behind Jenkins. So, yeah, I think they just wanted to get a look at him. And also it kind of tells you what part of the season they're in. They're in an evaluating part of the season, right? So they're not necessarily structuring the roster in a way every week that's going to be the best to squeeze the most potential out of it. They're really going to be focusing on player development for the rest of the season. Luke says this. Question is, my bad. Luke's question is, I think Sanders played well, but like you've been saying, I think the problems are bigger than on the Browns than just the quarterback position. Yeah, this is going to be the reality, right? This is why my expectations weren't, Shador's got to set the offense on fire, right? Now, it was great that he did a good job against the Raiders, but ultimately the kind of offensive performance we had versus the Raiders was very similar to the offensive performance that they had against the Dolphins, right? Like it wasn't like it was the most consistently high scoring affair that the Browns have had. That being said, yeah, I think Sanders is playing, like if you're asking me to judge the first two starts of all the quarterbacks that have played, I would say Sanders has looked the most promising in his first two starts of all the quarterbacks that have played for the Cleveland Browns this year, right? I think his first two starts were, maybe not statistically better than Joe Flacco. I think Joe Flacco almost had like 300 in the first game of the season, but that second game was pretty bad. Dillon Gabriel, I think this is better than Dillon, right? So, for the problems that exist on offense, which are going to be bigger than him at this point of his career, You're not expecting him to fix everything, but he is finding pathways to success, and he's not really being held back by some of the issues that he had on tape in college. So, I think it's a solid start for Shedeur for sure. Definitely a solid start. All right, we're going to get to more questions, but I got to thank my sponsor, Sleeper. Real quick, just want to let you guys know Sleeper has a new offer here. They're offering a free $20 entry, no deposit required. And also, if you're a first-time user, you also will receive a 100% match on up to $100 when you use the promo code Worst Take. Again, $20 free, no deposit required. Plus, first-time users also receive 100% deposit match up to $100. Join Sleeper. All right, Tracy says, what's the next step for David Njoku? He doesn't seem to be a priority in Tommy Rees's offense. Will the Browns simply move on at the season's end? This is an interesting question, right? Now, some of this is because, like we mentioned before, the Browns are saying the quiet part out loud a little bit here, right? They're bringing in Tevin to get a look at him, right? Not necessarily because they think that that's going to be some kind of game plan advantage, but because they want to evaluate Tevin Jenkins. Same thing's happening with David. They know who David Njoku is. They have their evaluation on David Njoku, but Harold Fannin is the one that they really want to get eyes on at this point. So they're giving Harold Fannin a lot of opportunities. I thought it was interesting because, like, while I was watching it during the game, I was like, wow, it's kind of like we traded David Njoku without trading David Njoku, because all the production has been given towards Harold Fannin, which makes me wonder, like, were they planning on trading David and a deal just didn't come through? Something interesting to think about there. But yeah, are they going to bring back David? I don't know. I think that the fact that there's not a deal done right now is a bigger indicator than like his targets. But yeah, the last few weeks, they've been giving every David Njoku target to Harold Fannin. And if you look at the tight ends that work in Kevin's offense, they tend to lean towards being more Harold Fannin than David Njoku, who's always been kind of a tough fit in the Kevin Stefanski offense. Now, how does that change if Kevin Stefanski is, not the coach next year? Like, that's a question to be asked, right? But right now, for what we know, it feels like David's being phased out for Harold Fannin. And the fact that David hasn't been paid yet, right? He hasn't gotten a contract. There's not a lot of examples of guys who get to the last year of their deal in Cleveland. The Browns don't decide to get a deal with them, and then the Browns make a deal with them in the offseason. The Browns usually handle these contracts a year or two ahead of time. And if they get to that final year of the deal, they're handling these contracts during the season. Nothing being done now, that's the bigger indicator to me. I think right now they're just in young player development and evaluation mode. Obviously, they're trying to win the games with the young players, but they're trying to put these young players in a position to, be in critical spots and get used to that. Obviously, you're not going to structure a game like a practice and be like, well, we're not going to run this. We're going to try to get Shedeur reps in the end zone or, something silly like that. But they are going to be like, hey, if David does stuff, let's see if Harold can do that stuff, So that's going to be kind of the mode that they're in. We'll see if that pays off. Garbon says, I was pretty impressed by the first half of Shedeur's performance. If we continue to see glimpses of that, even if we lose, do you think that will be Haslam? That will do enough for Haslam to still retain Stefanski? I think what's going to determine that for Kevin isn't going to be what happens on the field. It's going to be what's their internal evaluation on how Kevin is developing these young guys. What's their internal evaluation on why the offense was so poor this year? If they think it's something that Kevin didn't have control over based on the decisions that they made behind closed doors, then Kevin's going to get a free pass. If they feel like these were all things that Kevin had a hand in that ended up being problems for him, then Kevin's not going to get a free pass, right? Like, it's really going to matter how they feel about that. So, that's why I think, like, Kevin being fired, is it something I'd be okay with? Yes. Is it something that I feel comfortable enough to say is going to happen definitely at the end of the season? The more weeks go on, I'm less and less sure it's going to happen. But yeah, there's a lot to consider there with Kevin and if they're going to move on from him or not. Saved and Confused says, if we lose to the Titans next week, do you think Stefanski will be fired, or is he secure no matter what happens? He's not going to get fired at the middle of the season at this point, right? Like, it would be kind of weird to decide that this is the breaking point for Kevin Stefanski. I think that ship sailed after you didn't fire him after the Pittsburgh game. That was the last possible moment where it would have made sense to fire him during the season. And I wasn't a fan of firing him in the middle of the season to begin with. But again, like I said, to the answer to the last question, you know, Kevin's job security for this year and him keeping his job, not really going to be determined by his win-loss record more than it's going to be determined about how they feel about why things went wrong on offense this year and what Kevin could have done to really fix it. You know what I mean? Like, that's going to be key here for them going forward. But thank you for the question. We'll get on to the next one, which is from Antoine, who says, is it possible that this draft coming up is simply wide receiver and O-line if they think Shedeur is capable enough to be the quarterback at the end of the season? Also, I just want to say Jed Wills would still be on the team if we just left him. Okay, yeah, I don't know. I don't know if a simple change at right tackle fixes all of Jed Wills' problems. Like I think we got to be honest about the problems Jed Wills had and the fact that, you know, he started out fine at left tackle and then got progressively worse as his career went on. It doesn't seem like him switching from right to left was the issue. I think the issue was Jed Wills and how he was preparing for stuff. So, no, I reject that last comment. But as far as Shedeur goes, is it possible that the draft coming up is simply a wide receiver O-line? I think, again, it's going to be determined based on what the Browns feel about the quarterback class and what draft position they have. That is going to be the number one and number two determined, right? How strong of a class do they think this is internally? I think it's a strong class. They might disagree. They might agree. They might think it's a stronger class than I think it is. Either way, something you got to figure out. And then the second factor is, where are they drafting? Are they going to have an opportunity to get that player? So that is going to matter. So those are the two things. As far as like their evaluation of Shedeur, I think that adjust how aggressive they'll be in pursuing that quarterback, you know, but if a quarterback is there at a pick that they like, they're going to take him, you know, especially if it's a first round guy. They're going to take him, you know, so just preparing everybody for that. You know, I don't know if that's going to be the case. They might not like any of these quarterbacks, and this is all a moot point. They might love all three of them, and it is a very important point. But that's going to be the determiner, right? Chris Gustafaro says, if the Browns decide to draft the quarterback, do you think they keep Gabriel and Sanders for competition or trade them to get a veteran backup? I think about this every day because there's part of me that thinks, why not? Right? Like, why not? I understand why people would not want to do it, right? Because theoretically, you're introducing somebody that you drafted in the top 5 to a pretty loud situation here, right? Like, you're introducing them to a scenario where they're going to have to deal with a significant amount of noise. Now, my counterpoint to that would be, if you're drafting somebody in the top 5, it is because you think they are strong enough mentally to handle that challenge, right? You think that strongly of where Dante Moore is mentally. You think that strongly of where Fernando is or Ty Simpson is. And to be fair to all three of these guys, especially the latter here, Dante Moore and Ty Simpson, these are guys who know what it is like to have to sit a while and be patient for their opportunity, right? Dante Moore sat for a year behind Dylan Gabriel at Oregon. Ty Simpson sat for like 3 years behind Jalen Milroe. So you're not drafting somebody who doesn't have the patience to not be there. And for Fernando Mendoza, it feels like there's no indicator that he wouldn't have patience there as well. But so these guys would be familiar with that. And, I would assume you wouldn't want to start whoever you draft right away. And if Shedeur plays well enough for you to give him an opportunity to start in the meantime, that could be something that could end up being very fruitful to you. Because let's say, best case scenario, you end up with the Drew Brees, Phillip Rivers situation where you draft Mendoza, Moore, Simpson. You're really happy with the progress that they're making behind the scenes. But also, while you're waiting for those guys to develop, you're playing Shedeur Sanders in the meantime, and Shedeur is playing really, really well. Not well enough to make you move off the guy you picked number 5 overall, but well enough to where you're, relatively happy with the progress and you're happy with how Shedeur's playing. And you're saying to yourself, you got an asset here. What could end up happening is you can turn Shedeur into significant draft assets. Or if you feel stronger about Shedeur than the guy you drafted number 5 overall, you could turn that guy into significant draft assets to surround Shedeur with. Either way, you have something that you can really turn into significant assets for your football team. So, if you think Shedeur could be potentially a starter in the league, but you draft somebody you think could be better than him, I see a real strong appeal in just keeping Shedeur and letting him showcase himself throughout next season. And then once you're ready to build the thing around the guy you drafted, you can move Shedeur for some assets. And I think it'll be a win-win for everybody involved, right? For Shedeur, you get to go somewhere that really wants to treat you as the franchise guy and treat you as their number 1 pick instead of having to compete for attention in Cleveland. And if you're the other quarterback, you're going to be able to benefit from Shedeur playing well if he does and get more assets so that you can have more talent around you as you continue to evolve. I think it could work out. Obviously, that is the dream scenario. There are a million other ways that can work out that could be negative. And let's not ignore the fact that this could be a very, very big headache for everybody involved. Now, the one thing I'll say to that is that, one, I think Shedeur seems to be good at dealing with this aspect of his career. Also, I would say that the Browns seem to have the stomach to withstand the negative media attention they will endure for doing any of this, right? And the Browns, for better or worse, will make any decision they feel like is better for them on the football field. And sometimes it's very frustrating and sometimes it's very rewarding. So I wouldn't rule that out. I wouldn't rule it out that they say, hey, we're going to keep Shedeur, start Shedeur, then use Shedeur as an asset to help build around the guy that you draft, and then keep Dylan Gabriel as a backup. I get that everybody wants a clean slate, and hell, I've been there at this point of the season. But hey, it might be something you should consider. Like, maybe let Shedeur play a little bit more. If he can turn into a significant asset for you, let him become that. And even if best case scenario, one case scenario, if Shedeur becomes a starting quarterback, you keep Shedeur and you just roll with that. And it's Brock Purdy, Trey Lance, and you ship off that other quarterback for some draft assets. The other way around could work as well. And if they both don't work out, then they both don't work out. You know what I mean? But it could be something that benefits. It's just not going to be the funnest road to go down as a fan, but it could be the most rewarding one. Something to think about. I know it's not going to be popular at all at first mention. It's going to be something that takes time for people to be okay with. Aubrey Akers says this: how often do they use starters on special teams? I know I've seen Delpit and Carson there. Yeah, that's because those guys have specifically requested to play special teams this year because special teams has been such a disaster. So, those guys are stepping up to try to fix the problems that are there. And that's tremendous leadership by those two. It's just, unfortunately, tremendous leadership can't solve every problem on your team. 98 says this: understand offense hasn't been great this season from QB to O-line to play calling, but wide receivers have been letting both QBs down all seasons when they make plays. We got to talk about Jerry Jeudy going forward. What should the Browns do at wide receiver? Solving the quarterback issue is the number one, but any QB moving forward is going to need wide receivers to make plays. Oh, yeah, I think they need to take the pressure off of Jerry Jeudy this offseason and get some more bodies in that wide receiver room. I think Jerry Jeudy can be an effective wide receiver for you. It's just right now we're asking Jerry Jeudy to be a number one top 10 guy in this offense, and he's just not that. And he's folding under the pressure. He's crumbling under that pressure. So I think if you take the pressure off of Jerry Jeudy and you get some wide receivers, and luckily this seems like a very deep wide receiver class where you could get a guy in the late first and get a guy in the second round and get a guy in the third round potentially, then, you know, that I think that would do a lot to take pressure off of Jerry Jeudy and hopefully get more out of him going forward. Daryl C says that loss wasn't on Shedeur, just like the Jets game and the Vikings game weren't on Dillon. That said, the offense did get stagnant again, and perhaps it was just a win. Shedeur did not show the poise, but Shedeur did not show the poise and accuracy he had against the Raiders. If he continues to get the ball out slow and take bad sacks, can you see the team put Dillon in for a game or two? If he wants to play looser, already having been benched, having nothing to lose, to me, Dillon played too careful in his first two string starts on where he was looking over his shoulder. I just think if you're the Browns and you're trying to evaluate Dillon Gabriel, I think you just need to give him he just doesn't need to be out there for a little while, right? You don't want Dillon Gabriel to try to be something he's never been, right? And Dillon, you know, he's thrown the ball downfield a little bit more in his career, but Dillon has always had a game manager style of playing quarterback. That's who he is. And I think it can work for him if he's more confident in what he's doing. And I think the biggest thing that Dillon lost while he was out there was his confidence. And I think to rebuild that, he just doesn't need to play for a little while. So I don't think he's going to get back out there. I don't really see the benefit in him getting out there. And if he does, it's definitely not going to be at home because these fans are just brutal to Dillon Gabriel, undeserved. Like, I've seen other quarterbacks on this team deserving of a boo for stuff they've done off the field. What Dillon has been treated like is like, we treat him worse than Deshaun Watson. And, you know, Deshaun Watson's disgusting. So it's kind of crazy to me, right? You know, that Dillon gets treated as poorly as he does. But seeing that that's how he's getting treated at home, you don't need to subject him to that anymore. You know, so I see no reason to put him back in a game this year. Just kind of let him reset over the summer and really see, you know, what he can do just by learning from behind for now, you know. I think that's just what Dillon's path is going to have to be. But y'all, thank y'all for the questions. Y'all have a great day. Have an even better night. Peace.